Good evening, and welcome to the Lost Campfire, the virtual campfire where we will discuss the paranormal, the supernatural, the mysterious, and the bizarre. My name is McLean, keeper of the Lost Campfire, and tonight, I have some scary stories for you. Our first story brings us to the state of Washington, where an unusual set of footprints were found that made dozens of paranormal researchers descend upon a small town that led to weeks of investigations into one of the biggest and hairiest myths known to man. Then, later in the show, we will be exploring the mystery of a cryptid that first appeared in Puerto Rico, but has since spread throughout South America and the southern United States. If there's one thing that the people of Washington love more than coffee, it's Bigfoot. You can find Bigfoot damn near everywhere all across that Pacific state. He's on t-shirts, storefronts, company logos, public art projects, even government buildings. And believe it or not, the state of Washington has even passed anti-Bigfoot hunting laws to protect the hairy man. Even those who are not believers in the myth are happy to have this cryptid be their unofficial state animal. But why do the people of Washington love Bigfoot so much? Well, it probably has to do with Washington having the highest concentration of reported Bigfoot sightings in the United States. It is currently at 676, and we can only imagine how many unreported sightings and encounters there are. If there is any place in North America for a large ape to live undetected, it would probably be Washington. It gets plenty of precipitation, but very little snow. There is more than enough food to support life, regardless if they are herbivores or carnivores, and there are forests and mountains as far as the eye can see, that the hairy man can live undisturbed, aside from the occasional run-ins with humans. The Ohio grassman and Fouke monster should really consider moving to Washington. It's like the Bigfoot Graceland. With all of that being said, it is time to jump into our first story. It was November 24th, 1969, when a man named Joe Rhodes was visiting the landfill outside of the town of Bossburg, Washington. Rhodes was simply disposing of some trash when he noticed something strange in the dirt. It appeared to be several human-like footprints, but these prints were enormous in size. They appeared to not be wearing any sort of shoe or foot covering, and they were set deeply in the soil, which implied that whatever left these tracks weighed several hundred pounds. If Rhodes didn't know any better, he would have sworn that these were Bigfoot tracks. Now, on the surface, this story comes off as nothing more than your typical Sasquatch footprint discovery. A local finds a set of weird tracks, gets his name in the town's paper, and everyone moves on with their life. However, there was something different about these tracks. The right foot of the creature that made them was visibly deformed, leading this discovery to be infamously named the Cripplefoot tracks. After Rhodes had reported his findings, word of this unusual discovery quickly made its way through the paranormal community, and renowned Bigfoot investigator Renee DeHinden was quick to make a trip to Bossburg, Washington, to start an investigation. Unfortunately, by the time he got there, most of the tracks had been completely ruined. After news broke of the discovery, dozens of locals had rushed to the area to see for themselves, and their carelessness certainly showed. Thankfully, one of the locals used a bit of common sense and took a cardboard box to cover one of the tracks. This preserved track was of the creature's right foot, which clearly showed a great deformation. It is unclear whether this creature was born with such a deformity, or if these were the results of some sort of altercation between the Sasquatch and a mountain lion or bear. But regardless of how this deformity had happened, this one track was more than enough to pique DeHinden's interest and to keep him around to investigate. DeHinden and his research team spent weeks at this location, tirelessly looking for any sign of the hairy man. However, it had gotten to a point where they were about to give up. They may have thought that the Sasquatch they were looking for simply left the area, or possibly that this was all a hoax. That was until the research team hit the paranormal jackpot. That jackpot being a fresh trail of nearly 1,100 Sasquatch footprints found in the snow all around Lake Roosevelt near Bossburg, and every right footprint showed the same deformity that was found in the initial prints. The Lost Campfire will continue after this quick message. Attention all campers. Are you fascinated by the unexplainable and mysterious? Have you ever experienced something supernatural that you just can't shake off? Then we want to hear from you. The Lost Campfire is on the lookout for listeners to share their spine-tingling encounters with paranormal phenomena. Whether it's a ghostly apparition, a cryptid encounter, or a UFO sighting, I want to hear your story. Not only will your story be featured on The Lost Campfire, but it will also help us unravel some of the most perplexing mysteries of the paranormal. Your experience may be the missing link to help us understand the unknown. So don't be shy. Share your tale with us and help us continue our quest to uncover the truth about the supernatural. Together, we can explore the unexplainable and attempt to solve some of the most puzzling mysteries of all time. Send in your written or recorded story to thelostcampfire@gmail.com today to be featured in a future episode. I cannot wait to hear what you have experienced and to share it with other paranormal enthusiasts. Now, let's continue to follow those Cripplefoot tracks. The investigators were ecstatic, and they were convinced by the freshness of these tracks that they were hot on Bigfoot's trail. They followed the tracks for miles. They went up and down hills, and even across a river. Unfortunately, the tracks eventually led into a grove where the forest floor was primarily made of rocks, and no further tracks could be distinguished, and the trail was lost. Thankfully, almost immediately after the discovery of this trail, anthropologist and Bigfoot enthusiast Grover Krantz arrived in Bossburg, and he was able to take photographs and plaster casts of these tracks for later study. Research continued in the area for several weeks following the discovery of the snowprint trail, but nothing more was ever found, and the investigation died down, leading the researchers to move on to pursue more promising leads regarding the Bigfoot mystery. Now, obviously, these prints did not lead to the indisputable proof that Sasquatch does exist, but it still remains to be one of the best pieces of evidence we have in regards to Bigfoot. And this is not quite the end of the Cripplefoot tracks. At the time, the scientific community viewed this as nothing more than an elaborate hoax. In fact, at the time, pretty much any evidence collected surrounding Sasquatch was automatically disregarded. The scientific community would not even give the idea of an unknown bipedal ape living in North America the time of day. The research and evidence gathering was done by dedicated amateurs. But as the years have gone by, the attitude towards Bigfoot among scientists has definitely changed. Years after the events in Bossburg, the plaster casts of the Cripplefoot tracks have been studied by anthropologist Jeff Meldrum and primatologist John Napier. Both of them are convinced that these tracks were authentic and were made by a real Bigfoot. Also, upon further investigation, there were several reports surrounding Bossburg made by locals claiming to have seen Sasquatch-like creatures in the area before the Cripplefoot tracks were initially discovered. At the time, the authorities did very little to follow up on these reports, and unfortunately, no evidence was ever collected outside of the report itself. And what I personally find to be the most compelling piece of evidence regarding this whole case would be the location of the original tracks, right outside the Bossburg landfill. I believe that this Sasquatch was most likely unable to properly hunt or search for food due to the condition of its right foot. Either by birth defect or an injury, this foot most likely made running and walking a painful and rigorous chore. This creature would probably use the landfill as a quick and easy source of food, especially when you consider that these tracks were found in the winter months when food can be more difficult to come by in nature. Researcher René de Hinden has also considered this theory, but he dismisses it. I guess this is where I and the quote-unquote experts disagree. But, as to not be biased, I should point out that not everything supports the authenticity of the Cripplefoot tracks. For example, after the initial investigation, the town of Bossburg was plagued with multiple Sasquatch hoaxes that put the whole situation into question. In January of 1970, a prospector named Joe Metlow claims that he had trapped a Sasquatch in an abandoned mine shaft, and he was willing to reveal the location to the highest bidder. The bidding topped around $55,000 before someone finally called Metlow's bluff, and the whole story collapsed in on itself. Shortly after that hoax was exposed, Metlow then claimed to have an actual Sasquatch foot in a freezer, and once again tried to sell it off to the highest bidder. For some reason, people actually believed him again, but it was not long until it was realized to be another hoax. Honestly, who didn't see that coming? Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice. Finally, in October of 1970, Ivan Marks, who was one of the researchers who accompanied Renee DeHinden on the original investigation, claimed to have filmed the Cripplefoot Sasquatch. This sparked new interest in the Bossburg Bigfoot, but this also sparked a bidding war for the rights to the film. I think we can all see where this is going. At first, many were convinced that this was authentic video evidence of Sasquatch. However, Bigfoot enthusiast Peter Brine was skeptical. He went to the location where the creature was supposedly filmed, and was able to determine that the creature was no larger than an average man. Afterwards, all interest in the film disappeared, and it was largely forgotten. But Ivan Marks having perpetrated this hoax also brings the entire validity of the original tracks into question, seeing as he was part of the investigation. Some say that this entire thing was nothing but a hoax concocted by Marks. And that is definitely a compelling argument to make. But I do think it is worth bringing up that at no point during the investigation did Marks ever try to extort money out of anyone to see the tracks. That kind of behavior only came up almost a year after the interest in the case had died. So it is certainly possible that Marks had hoaxed this entire thing, but I do think it is incredibly unlikely. After all, the idea of someone strapping big, clunky wooden fake Sasquatch carvings to their feet, then walking for several miles, going up and down hills, and across dangerous rivers in the winter, would take insane levels of dedication, and then try to extort money a year later? Things don't seem to add up. Though the Cripplefoot tracks in Bossburg, Washington, may have been followed by multiple hoaxes, I still believe that the original tracks were made by a real Sasquatch. The ridiculously long trail of almost 1,100 prints, the analysis of the prints by scientific professionals, along with the supporting Bigfoot sightings that preceded the tracks, convince me that something unknown to man is living in the forests of Washington state. But by this point in time, that creature would be long dead. But if that foot deformity was caused by genetic factors, there's a possibility that this creature was able to mate with a female Sasquatch and pass on that genetic defect. Who knows? Maybe one day another set of Cripplefoot tracks will be found. If that were to happen, then we would know that the descendants of Cripplefoot are alive and well. The Lost Campfire will be right back after this short message. If you are someone who enjoys exploring the mysterious, unknown, and paranormal, then I would like to introduce you to an exciting opportunity. I would like to encourage you to become a Patreon subscriber for The Lost Campfire. As a subscriber, you will gain access to exclusive content and get the latest episodes before anyone else. Plus, you will have the opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals who share the same passion for paranormal phenomena. By becoming a subscriber, you will support me in my efforts to produce high-quality content and sustain the show's operations. Plus, you will enable me to invest in equipment and enhance the show's audio quality, and expand my opportunities to provide more fascinating investigations and stories. In summary, becoming a Patreon supporter for The Lost Campfire is an excellent way to nurture your passion for the unexplained, while getting unparalleled access to exclusive content. So join a community of enthusiasts and discover intriguing stories that you will not find anywhere else. So why not subscribe today and see what mysteries await you? Now, let us return to the campfire. Nearly every culture on Earth has tales, myths, and folklore surrounding the idea of vampiric creatures. Unholy beings that stalk the night in search of fresh blood from the living. When we think of vampires, we mainly think of beings like Dracula and Nosferatu, things that were once human, but now raised from their coffins with black capes and pointy fangs. Obviously, different cultures have imagined their blood-sucking boogeyman in different ways, but usually a similar framework is there. But of course, we know that vampires simply do not exist. Those were merely superstitious stories made up by uneducated people from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. There really hasn't been any new tales of vampiric monsters outside of movies and fantasy media. Or at least, that's what most people thought, until a South American island became the new hunting ground for a vicious bloodsucker that had a rather specific appetite for the blood of goats and other livestock. To understand this situation, we have to go to the United States territory of Puerto Rico. In February of 1975, there began reports of livestock being found dead in farmers' fields in the small town of Moca. To be more specific, over a dozen dead cows, a pig, 2 geese, and 3 goats were found dead within a very small time frame across this village. At first, that does not sound like that big of a deal. Livestock are often easy targets for predatory animals. Mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, and foxes view farms as all-you-can-eat buffets, and farmers are well aware of these pests and have ways of dealing with them. However, this time, there was something very different about these cases of dead livestock. Usually, a predator will come in, eat their fill of meat, and leave before they are caught. The only sign of their visit would be tracks, blood, and some fur or feather left behind from their dinner. What made these cases interesting was that these animals were found almost completely intact. There was no bloody mess, no gnawed bones stripped of flesh, no tooth or claw marks, nothing. Well, I should say almost nothing. When the animals were inspected more closely, it could be seen that all of them had a series of circular puncture wounds across their bodies. And when the animals were cut open to see what caused their death, it was found that every single one of them had been completely drained of their blood. It seemed as though some sort of vampiric creature had come to this small community. At the time, this unknown bloodsucker was named El Vampiro de Moca, or the Vampire of Moca in English. It wasn't long until this monster struck again, but thankfully, it was witnessed by a farmer who was able to give a description of what he saw. It was described as having large leathery wings and 2 sharp fangs. Essentially what was seen was a gigantic vampire bat. At the time, this was a major news story for the town of Moca. The local newspapers had stories about this creature almost daily, though it should be said that the supposed creature was not nearly as active as the media was. It wasn't long until the attacks stopped, and the media dropped the story altogether, and the tales of the vampire of Moca have since been largely forgotten, and have fallen into the realm of scary bedtime stories. But this was not the end of Latin American blood drinkers. 20 years later, an even stranger vampire arose to terrorize the good people of Puerto Rico. It was March of 1995 when the attacks started again. Large numbers of goats and sheep were being found dead in farmers' fields, and like the cases back in the 70s, these animals were also found completely drained of their blood, and having 3 puncture wounds in their chest area. It would seem that El Vampiro had finally returned. This creature, or possibly creatures, spent the next several months going on a livestock killing spree. Farming communities were left terrified and paranoid about where the beast may strike next, and if it was going to be their animals that would end up on the menu. The town of Canovanas was the main hunting ground for this vampire. Over 150 animals were drained of their blood in this area alone. It was also in this town where the creature was finally spotted by an eyewitness, young Madeline Tolentino. However, what Madeline saw was very different from the bat-like Vampiro de Moca. What she saw was a 3 to 4 foot tall bipedal reptilian beast with kangaroo-like legs, a series of spines going down its back, and glowing red eyes. The name El Chupacabra was given to this creature, that name literally translating to the goat sucker. But it should be noted that this monster did not just have an appetite for goats. Very few animals were safe from the fangs of the Chupacabra. It reportedly fed on chickens, cows, horses, and even domesticated cats and dogs. And like the Moca monster, El Chupacabra became a media sensation. Newspapers and TV stations were reporting stories of this creature on a daily basis. No community would be safe as long as the Chupacabra was out there. Citizens became paranoid. Farmers were afraid to go to sleep at night, not knowing if their animals were going to be the next victim of the vampire. Even mothers were afraid to let their children play outside at night. They were far too worried that their youngsters would be easy prey for El Chupacabra. But not everyone was going to live in fear. Hunting parties were formed, and armed guards patrolled farms at night, hoping that they would be able to find this beast and solve their problems once and for all. But nothing ever came from these endeavors. Eventually, like the vampire of Moca, the attacks became less and less frequent. They went from being a daily occurrence to once a week, then once a month. And now, we would be lucky if the Chupacabra is spotted once a year in Puerto Rico. It would seem that the goats and chickens of that island are relatively safe for the time being. Though the attacks have largely stopped, doesn't mean that the Chupacabra is no longer relevant in Puerto Rico. There are still countless people who vividly remember the fear and hysteria that this monster caused, and many of them are still avid believers in its existence. And though the sightings are somewhat infrequent now, there are still sightings to this day, which keep farmers on their toes. And of course, like any good cryptid, there are many theories to this creature's origin. Some believe that it is an alien that crash-landed on the Caribbean island and has made do feeding on the local livestock. Others believe that this creature was created by the United States government that escaped during some sort of test or transportation. It has since acted as an invasive species, feeding on animals that have no way to defend themselves against such a foreign beast. And of course, others believe that the Chupacabra is a demon straight from hell. Personally, if this creature does exist, I believe that it probably originated from some sort of genetic experiment that has gone horribly wrong. Or, on a more haunting idea, a genetic experiment that has gone horribly right. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and the U.S. is no stranger to weird experiments. They may have made this monster as a way to exterminate an opposing country's production of food from livestock, and to strike fear into the hearts of their citizens. They used Puerto Rico as testing grounds to see how adept this creature is at hunting its prey. Using an isolated island would keep the creature in somewhat of a controlled environment, and would prevent it from wreaking havoc on the mainland. However, during this test, the United States was unable to recapture the monster, and it has lived on this island ever since. Or maybe this is not some sort of lab-grown monster. Perhaps this is an ancient species that has been around for thousands of years. Could this thing hibernate for extended periods of time before waking up to go on another killing spree? Then, once it had its fill of blood, it would return to its slumber until it was ready to feed again. That may be the explanation as to why there was a 20-year time gap between the Moca vampire attacks and the Chupacabra attacks. For now, it is impossible to know. We can just pray that whatever this thing is stays in its slumber, or has been returned to the lab it was created in, so the good people of Puerto Rico never have to live through such a terrifying epidemic again. But the Chupacabra story does not end here, for there is at least one more blood-sucking monster that shares the same name that has been stalking the mainland of the southern United States and Mexico. The stories are nearly identical. Farmers and ranchers in the southern parts of North America find many of their livestock dead, drained of blood, and having puncture marks on their bodies. Sounds like typical Chupacabra activity. Well, as typical as horrifying paranormal creatures can be. Though the behavior may be similar to that of the Puerto Rican Chupacabra, the appearance of this creature couldn't be more different. This beast is reportedly more canid in appearance. It walks on all fours, has grayish skin, a long snout, pointed ears, and a tail. The only resemblance to the Puerto Rican Chupacabra is that in some cases, it is reported to have similar spines running down its back. This creature has also been captured on camera in broad daylight multiple times. Hell, there are even people who claim to have shot and killed the beast. However, upon analysis of the videos and corpses of all these supposed chupacabras, It has been determined that they are all either coyotes, dogs, or a hybrid of the two, who suffer from a skin condition called mange. This skin parasite causes the animal to lose all of its fur, and their skin becomes thick, rough, and gray. If someone unfamiliar with this skin condition were to see, say, a coyote with it, they would most likely think it's some sort of monster. It certainly doesn't help that coyotes and wild dogs have a knack for preying on small livestock, like goats and chickens. So, what people are seeing in Mexico and the southern United States is most likely just a sick canine. But that does not change the fact that there have still been reported accounts of livestock and domestic animals being found with puncture marks on their bodies and being drained of their blood. Mange-ridden animals are obviously not the culprit. They just happen to be in the area when these killings have taken place. Has the bat-like Vampiro de Moca somehow found its way to the mainland? Or has the United States government unleashed several more blood-hungry genetic reptilian monstrosities in Texas and Mexico? Some say this is nothing more than just misidentification followed by mass hysteria. But that doesn't change the fact that hundreds of animals have been killed and drained of their blood. If this is just a hoax, then I would have to tip my hat to the perpetrators. Their commitment is incredibly impressive. All I know is that there is something draining the blood of animals in South America and the southern parts of North America. Be it an ancient predator, a lab-grown monster, or a life form from another planet. Regardless of its origins, we know that this creature has been able to kill and feed on animals that weigh well over 1,000 pounds. So let's just pray that whatever this thing is never develops a taste for human blood. Because if it did, we could all be in some serious danger. Well, campers, it appears that the fire is dying, and the sun is rising. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again next week around the Lost Campfire. This episode was written and produced by me, McLean, Keeper of the Lost Campfire. Podcast artwork done by Kelly Bowen. You can find her on Instagram at KelsBells95.